Imagine a single family, so powerful that emperors bowed to their credit, kings adjusted their wars to match their balance sheets, and governments lived or died based on their willingness to extend a loan. For over a century, the Rothschilds were not just bankers. They were the bloodstream of Europe's money and power. Their story reads like a conspiracy thriller, a clan moving money faster than monarchies could move soldiers, whispering decisions in palaces, while their own faces stayed largely invisible. But here's the unsettling truth. This family didn't need crowns or armies. They engineered modern finance itself. And we are still living inside the machine they built. To understand how they rose, we need to step back into Europe at the end of the 18th century. The continent was a patchwork of rival kingdoms and empires: Austria, Prussia, France, Britain, the fading Holy Roman Empire. Wars were constant, monarchies fragile, treasuries unstable. Gold and silver were the foundation of money, but armies aided faster than kings could mint coins. In this chaotic landscape, credit was not a luxury, it was survival. And that's where Mayer Amschel Rothschild enters the picture. Born in Frankfurt in 1744, Mayer wasn't destined for power. He started as a coin dealer, running a small shop in the city's Jewish ghetto. But he was shrewd. He realized that handling coins wasn't nearly as profitable as arranging loans and managing wealth for the aristocracy. He became the financial agent for the Prince of Hesse, one of the richest men in Europe at the time. That connection was his golden ticket. By the time the Napoleonic Wars erupted, Mayer had already laid the foundation of a dynasty. And he had a plan far bigger than any other banker. He sent each of his 5 sons to a different European capital: London, Paris, Vienna, Naples, and Frankfurt, creating a family banking network that no government could match. Think about that strategy. In an age when news traveled by horseback and war could swallow a country in months, Mayer built a private intelligence and financial system faster than most states. His sons could move money across borders, lend to allies in one city while collecting debts in another, and most importantly, spread risk. If Paris fell to Napoleon, London was still running. If Vienna was bankrupt, Frankfurt had credit. That international web was the true innovation. It was diversification at a geopolitical scale. The Napoleonic Wars turned the Rothschilds from clever bankers into titans. Governments needed money desperately. Britain, fighting Napoleon, borrowed astronomical sums. Armies had to be supplied, paid, fed, moved, and traditional royal treasuries were too slow, too corrupt, and too fragile. The Rothschilds stepped in. Their courier network could move information and gold faster than official channels. And in a world where a day's delay could mean the collapse of an army, speed was power. The most famous example is Waterloo in 1815. The legend says Nathan Rothschild in London learned of Napoleon's defeat before anyone else, dumped British bonds to spark panic, then secretly bought them back for a fortune when the news broke. That story has been exaggerated into myth. But here's the kernel of truth. The Rothschild couriers really did deliver news faster than official messengers. Nathan Rothschild did use that information advantage in the bond market. And after Waterloo, the British government did become ever more dependent on Rothschild credit. In other words, whether or not the story played out exactly as the myth claims, the point is the same. Information and credit were the new weapons of empire, and the Rothschilds wielded both. By the 1820s, they weren't just funding wars, they were financing peace. They lent to governments across Europe, underwriting massive state loans. They helped fund railways in France and Austria, canals in Britain, mining in Spain. When countries wanted to stabilize their economies, they issued bonds, and the Rothschilds were often the ones orchestrating the sales. They turned sovereign debt into a standardized market. That's a model so familiar to us today, we barely notice it. Every time you hear about a government issuing bonds, borrowing on international markets, or facing a debt crisis, you're hearing echoes of the Rothschild blueprint. This was their genius. They realized real power wasn't hoarding gold in a vault. Real power was controlling who had access to capital, under what terms, and at what price. That meant they didn't just make money off loans. They decided which governments could rise, which could reform, and which would sink under debt. They didn't need to overthrow kings. They made kings dependent on them. By the mid-19th century, the Rothschilds were at their zenith. Their family arms stretched across Europe like a nervous system of credit. They financed Britain after Waterloo, Austria during its reforms, France under the July monarchy, and even the Holy See. They were called upon to stabilize economies after revolutions and to rescue governments on the brink of collapse. In an age when governments had no central banks as we know them today, the Rothschilds themselves were the central bank. Their stamp of approval could make a bond issue succeed or fail. They weren't only in government finance. The Rothschilds poured money into railroads, mines, and infrastructure, industries that defined the Industrial Revolution. When railways were being carved through mountains and across plains, Rothschild capital was often there. They invested in copper mines in Spain, oil in the Caucasus, and even the Suez Canal. If capital was the oxygen of industrial growth, they were among the few who controlled the flow. And of course, with that came suspicion. By the mid-19th century, people whispered about Rothschild control of Europe. Were they secretly running Britain's empire? Did they manipulate revolutions? Had they replaced monarchs with their own invisible power? Conspiracy theories exploded because people instinctively understood something. Money and power had shifted. The throne was no longer the strongest chair in the room. The bond market was. And at the head of that market sat the Rothschilds. But even at their height, their power had limits. Other banking dynasties, the Barings, the Warburgs, competed for influence. More importantly, the very system the Rothschilds perfected was too successful to remain private for long. By the late 19th century, governments began creating their own central banks, more structured and regulated financial markets, and broader institutions that reduced reliance on one family. The Bank of England evolved. The Banque de France grew in power. And eventually, the United States would create the Federal Reserve. The age of private dynasties dominating sovereign credit was giving way to the age of institutional banking. Then came the 20th century, and with it, catastrophe. 2 world wars, revolutions, the Great Depression, and the Holocaust shattered the old world order. The Rothschilds, like other Jewish families, were persecuted. Their assets in Austria, Germany, and France were seized by the Nazis. The family lost palaces, businesses, and collections. Their influence never fully recovered. After 1945, the rise of America and its dollar dominance, combined with the sheer scale of modern finance, eclipsed any private family. Wall Street and central banks now called the shots. But here's the paradox. While their direct dominance declined, the system they created only grew stronger. Sovereign bonds became the backbone of modern economies. Every nation today borrows on markets shaped by Rothschild innovations. The courier networks they pioneered became today's financial information networks. Their principle that power lies not in gold itself, but in controlling credit and flow, became the DNA of the global financial system. This is where the myth took on a life of its own. Even as their real power waned, conspiracy theories about the Rothschilds grew. They became the symbol of invisible control, the faceless family supposedly manipulating wars, revolutions, and economies. The truth was more unsettling.
They didn't need to secretly run the system anymore. The system itself was their legacy. Today, yes, Rothschild descendants remain. The family still runs Rothschild & Co., a respected investment bank headquartered in Paris with branches in London and elsewhere. They still manage wealth, advise corporations, and oversee assets worth billions of dollars. They are still wealthy, still influential, but they are no longer emperors of finance. Modern giants like BlackRock, JP Morgan, or Goldman Sachs make the Rothschilds of today look modest by comparison. And yet, their ghost is everywhere. Every time you hear about a debt crisis, Mexico in 1982, Greece in 2010, Argentina almost every decade, you're hearing the echo of the system the Rothschilds helped build.
When central banks set interest rates, when governments issue bonds, when markets punish nations for deficits, those are the mechanics of a world the Rothschilds engineered 2 centuries ago. They created the template, finance as the ultimate weapon of power, invisible but absolute. That's why this story matters today. Most people live their lives assuming money is neutral, just a tool, but history shows us otherwise. The Rothschilds proved that money is a lever of power. It can build railways or topple empires, fund wars or rescue governments, enrich dynasties or enslave nations in debt. The family may no longer sit at the center of power, but the machine they perfected still does. And unless you understand it, you're trapped by it. So what's the lesson? Don't get distracted by the myth that one family still secretly rules the world. That's too easy. The reality is harder and far more dangerous. The Rothschilds didn't need to rule forever. They engineered a system that outlived them, a financial architecture that still dictates the rules of wealth, debt, and control. If you want financial freedom, you need to understand that system. Because whether it's 19th century kings or 21st century consumers with credit cards, the trap is the same. Dependency on a financial order designed for those who issue credit, not for those who borrow it. History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. And the rhyme of the Rothschilds is still with us, a reminder that real wealth isn't just about money, it's about who writes the rules of money. If you don't learn that lesson, history will crush you with it. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe.